Oh, I'm going to start off by handing over to Annie Sesma, who's UEA's International Research Funding Manager, and she's going to open the event for us. Thank you, Annie.
Thank you, and good morning or good afternoon to everybody. Maybe if it's good, you can pass on to the next slide, Hannah. I want to give a brief introduction, maybe for some people that is just or has recently joined the Microplastics sub-project. So this is an award provided by the Research Council in the UK to the University of East Anglia. It's a cross-institutional, cross-faculty award. So this is being carried out, this research project, by several schools. We've got 4 sub-projects in this, the child malnutrition, sustainable food systems, family literacy, and microplastics. This, the main aim of this award, it is to include practical, so to be able to discover practical tools and commercial opportunities for products and services that have been used by local communities. So to develop fast track and promising outcomes that can help people to make environments and lives healthier, safer, and more sustainable. We were very lucky that we were awarded with this project. And I have to say that has been, from the UEA perspective, very challenging, because it involves 15 international partner organizations in 10 different countries. From the administration point of view, we have learned a lot, and we have tried to share good practices and be able to establish good relationships to be able to carry out this project. I think that has been an immense opportunity, and we are very grateful how well all the teams have worked across the project despite the pandemic. And this has been an amazing effort from all the teams. So I have to say a big thank you to all of you, because we are aware of the difficulties that have pandemic imposed on the projects. Despite of that, has been amazing the creativity of the research groups to be able to adapt and the project, and you are a big example of that. So I think that has been an exciting opportunity to be able to create new partnerships. I hope that beyond this project, which we are near to an end, this will continue. I hope that we can find funding extra to support and keep this network going on. And I am still working, so my role as international funding manager is going to an end when the project ends, but I will be still at the university, and I can assure you that any single or any opportunity that I can see in the horizon, I will be in touch with Andrew and contact you to be able to continue with this network. And so basically, I think that this could be what I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you, Annie. Shall I go on to the next slide, which shows what's happening for the rest of today?
Yeah, it will be good.
So hopefully all the participants know that we've split this event over 2 days so that we don't get Zoom fatigue being online for an 8-hour slog. So we've got 2 4-hour sessions. The first is today and the second is tomorrow. The same meeting link should get you into tomorrow's event, so we hope you can join us then. So for today, we're going to be talking a bit about the GRTA Microplastics project, hearing from the different partners and what they've done, starting with Andrew Mays, who's leading the project from the UEA side. And then we're going to have a break in a couple of hours, and then we've got a session which is around how monitoring and science can feed into education and advocacy that's been led by Moritz with a number of people. So thank you for everyone involved in that. And we'll be finishing off today with a discussion session about how kind of reflecting on how the network, the microplastics network in Malaysia has developed over the past couple of years, what's went well, what could have been done differently, and what the next steps could be. So that's really a session for people that have been closely involved in the project, and if you want to leave us before that starts, you can, but if you want to stay and observe, then you're more than welcome. So that's just a flow of what's going to be happening over the next few hours. And for now, I'm going to hand over to Andrew so that he can get his slides ready for his talk. Okay, Andrew, I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Hannah. So I'll share my screen, hopefully. Can you see that?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I've lost the Teams stuff. I don't know where that's all gone, but never mind. I shall just talk through anyway, and hopefully it'll all go fine. So welcome everybody, and thank you very much for joining us, whether it's morning or evening where you are. And I'd like to just spend a bit of time at the beginning of this symposium just explaining what the GRTA Microplastic project is, how it came about, and the kind of very first steps of the project that I was very much practically involved in from the UEA side. And then I think other people are going to talk much more about how the project's been carried on and what they've done in Malaysia. So sadly, because of COVID, we weren't able to welcome people to UEA, but I'd like to just briefly welcome you to a virtual University of East Anglia and show you this this picture of our campus. So the School of Chemistry, where I live, is right in the centre of the campus here. We have a nice view over to the boiler house chimney at the back, but fortunately I'm on the nice side, so I get a view down here to the beautiful Broad, so the lake, which is on campus. And for those of you who don't know where UEA is, it's in the historic city of Norwich, which is about 2 hours by train north east of London. Probably for most of you, I don't need to introduce or explain the background to the plastic litter and microplastics crisis, but clearly this is a major global issue currently, and despite the fact that it's by now much more widely recognised and understood, there is still a huge problem with finding solutions and actually tackling this problem in a practical way to reduce the amount of plastic waste that's going into the environment. And of course, this kind of macro plastic waste problem is highly visible, and there are all the kind of interactions with larger scale nature, which people see, and this is a kind of very powerful image and very powerful message to encourage people to think about plastic waste and what's going on with it. But really my involvement, I should say, yeah, the plastic litter problem is really most acute in this whole large region of Southeast Asia. It's not to say that everybody doesn't have problems. All around the world this is a problem, but it seems like the biggest inputs and the biggest issues around plastic waste management are in Southeast Asia, and that's partly a problem of lots of rich Western countries over here that have offshore shipped their own plastic waste problems to various countries in this region for post-processing of consumer plastic waste. So really, despite this data from Jambek that implies that this is the kind of the region of greatest concern, if you like, it is really a truly global problem. And of course, underneath this huge macro plastic waste problem lies a much less visible plastic waste problem, which is what happens to all this plastic waste as it breaks down and decomposes. And by a whole variety of mechanisms, physical and chemical and biological, the larger pieces of plastic gradually degrade into smaller and smaller particles. And here there are a few examples. These are some bits of plastic film that have reduced down to a size of some few centimetres, and of course they reduce down further to millimetre-sized objects. All these ones happen to come out of a wastewater treatment plant. And the story goes on. The particles get smaller and smaller and smaller, and they get increasingly difficult to observe, detect, identify and count. And this is really where my interest in microplastic work originated. And our contribution really began about 8 or 9 years ago when we became interested in this problem. And we realised pretty quickly that the techniques that were being used to measure and detect microplastics at that time were really very slow, very subjective, and really not fit for purpose if we were going to think about, for instance, large-scale monitoring, so we could understand the nature and scale of this problem, initially in the UK, but later, obviously, more globally. And my interest and my analytical background led me and a group of collaborators to develop a relatively rapid, low-cost screening technique that could be used to detect microplastics and count them, even really small microplastics, in sometimes quite complex samples. And this whole technique is based on this lovely dye. There's a bit of chemistry. This dye is called Nile Red, and Nile Red has been known for a long time as a dye that adsorbs to hydrophobic materials, and it's been used for many years to stain cell membranes, for instance, in biological cells. But we used it because of its ability to adsorb to the surface of plastic particles. And when it does this, it tags them, it labels them and makes them fluorescent, so that when you shine a blue light on them, they then show up in these bright yellow, orange, red colours. And this makes the plastic particles stand out from the background, and it allows you to see the particles on filters. And there's a filter loaded here on this holder, and to make the observation of these fluorescing microplastic particles easier, we also built and developed these simple but reliable imaging rigs that allow us to photograph microplastics on these filters as a number of individual photographs, which are then put together to give us an image of the whole filter that we have here. And from that image, we can then count and measure the microplastics we have present. So this was just an example here to show you what you observe. So we have this is a very old example from a very not optimized system. But you can see you have a series of photos here that are all stitched together, and all the bright microplastic objects show up against a much duller background on these filter images. And if you zoom into the photographs, you can see here, this is one photograph. You can see some fibres here, which I've enlarged here, and even very small particles, in this case 20 microns and even less, you can see these particles glowing against the background, and you can therefore detect them and count them. So this produced quite a significant kind of step forward in analysing microplastics, because it made it possible to measure large numbers of samples quite quickly and efficiently. And we published this work back in 2017, early 2017, and it's now been cited more than 380 times. But the important thing about this really was that the technique got seen and taken up by a researcher in the US called Sherry Mason, who runs the chemistry department at New York Fredonia. And she was commissioned by a campaigning media organisation called Orb Media to assess microplastic levels in bottled drinking water. So in their study, they measured a large number of bottles of water from multiple batches and brands from lots of different countries around the world. And their perhaps, well, at the time, very shocking conclusion was that nearly all of this water contained microplastic particles. And while I didn't actually do this research, it used a technique that we developed. And as a result of that, I became involved with the breaking of this story, which was featured on BBC News at 10 in 2018. And it proved to be an incredibly interesting story that troubled a lot of people, I think. So it rippled around the world over a 24-hour period and was reported extremely widely. And it generated really a huge amount of media interest in microplastics and the kind of shock that they were everywhere and that we were consuming them. And the result of that, the interest in that bottled water story, was it actually led the World Health Organization to announce a review into the potential risks of microplastics in drinking water. And that review took place and it's now been published. And you can go and read the conclusions of that review if you're interested. But the important thing from the microplastic story was that it demonstrated that basic research that we'd done in our lab could lead directly to eventual impact in terms of policy and an understanding. And as a result of that, I was fortunate enough to win an Innovation and Impact Award at UEA. And the importance of that is that it demonstrated that this microplastics work was generating impact. And as a result of that, this opportunity came along for UEA to bid into the UK research councils to apply for money to demonstrate how research could generate impact in overseas countries who were receiving development aid from the UK. And so Arnie asked me and a number of other people around the university to a meeting to discuss the possibility of putting together a large institutional bid to this research programme to try and get some funding to take some of our research and expertise and see if we could help other countries to use that knowledge and research to develop impact and create systems in their own countries. And the plan we came up with involved Malaysia. And the reason for that is because I had some contacts in Malaysia, particularly at University of Malaysia, Terengganu, because I'd had a previous PhD student from that university. She worked on nanomaterials, nothing to do with microplastics at all at the time. But it meant that we had contacts and that UEA actually had quite a lot of history with working at UMT because of their link to marine research and the very strong background in marine research that we have here at UEA. But for this project vision, we wanted to ensure that we included the whole of Malaysia, both Peninsular Malaysia and East Malaysia, and so we sought another partner and made contact with Moritz Müller in Kuching, who I'm sure will say more during this symposium. So we then had contacts and bases that we could work with in both East and West Malaysia, and this resulted in us putting together this large research proposal called the Global Research Translation Award. And thanks to the tireless work of Annie and many other people at UEA, all the very diverse strands of this project got drawn together in a very effective way, and we were fortunate enough that it was funded by UKRI through the Overseas Development Aid budget. So this whole project came into being, and of course the part we're talking about in the next 2 days is one of the 4 sub-projects of that overall project. And it's called Building Microplastic Monitoring Capacity in Malaysia, a pilot study for implementation in the wider Southeast Asian context. And hopefully tomorrow we will discuss much more about the wider Southeast Asian context. But today's symposium is really focusing more on building the monitoring capacity in Malaysia and progress that's been made in that direction. So I'd like to introduce you to the key people in this project, and I won't say much about them because I'm sure they'll all introduce themselves and what they've been doing. But the main players: Suhaimi Surtman in the Institute of Oceanography and Environment at University of Malaysia, Terengganu. Yin He, Yen, who is the network coordinator for this project, and I had the pleasure of hosting Yen at UEA in my lab for 6 months prior to this project starting. So she's one of the few people who's been to visit UEA, and she is coordinating the project. Moritz Müller, I've just mentioned, at Swinburne University in Sarawak, and he'll be speaking later as well. And these 2 people won't be speaking, but they're very important to the project. Christine Cornea is a filmmaker, and Alex Smith is her assistant, and they've been very involved in making training videos that have been used and disseminated as part of this project, and they are also currently in the process of making a short kind of summary film to tell the story of the project and what it's achieved. So they're working on that right now. And of course, behind the whole project is a vital team of people who've managed the project, managed the very complex finances of working across universities, across countries, across cultures, trying to deal with all the complexities of legal arrangements and financial administration of the project and so forth. So these people probably won't be seen too much, but I'd just like to take this opportunity at the front of the symposium to really thank them for their support, because it's been fabulous working with this professional team, and it's made an enormous difference to the success of the project. Okay, so the basic plan of the project was to try and translate the the methodology that we developed at UEA and the skills we'd developed in using it, and to try and transfer those skills to Malaysia and help teams in Malaysia to apply those skills to their own problems, their own questions, and their own context. So with that in mind, the key part at the beginning of the project for me was to build kits of equipment, including the imaging instruments we developed and the various ancillary laboratory equipment that you need around that to make the methodology that we developed work in a practical sense. And along with those kits, we also produced some training videos, and it was a great opportunity that Yen was at UEA in my lab at that time, so she worked with us to produce these training videos, which she then helped us to translate into other languages. And she worked with Christine and Alex on that project. And so, yeah, we were trying to kind of get the equipment and the expertise, the knowledge transferred to Malaysia, in the hope that the Malaysian teams could then use it to further their scientific interests and questions around microplastic research, and hopefully ultimately convert that science into policy advice, advocacy, and also to contribute to wider public understanding of plastic waste and microplastics, in the hope that it can lead to behaviour change that can improve the situation and lead to public pressure to change policy and so forth. And that work hopefully will be continued over time. Clearly, it's been enormously challenging to do these kinds of things in the midst of a pandemic. And when this project was conceived, we had no idea that there was going to be a global COVID pandemic, and that has undoubtedly coloured the whole project, both in terms of what could be achieved and also the way it could be achieved. And I'm sure elements of that will be apparent as we discuss what people have done over the next 2 days. Okay, so to finish, I just wanted to show a couple of pictures of what went on at UEA before all these equipment kits got shipped to Malaysia. And we set up a little workshop on the top floor of chemistry where we built all these imaging instruments. Yen, as I said, did lots of work working with Christine and Alex, producing the training video, which I'm sure she'll say more about. It was all hands on deck, particularly in the last moments as we packed all the equipment into shipping cases to be sent off to Malaysia. But eventually, after much very hard work behind the scenes, we managed to get all these kits packed up, and I thank all the admin team who turned up. There's a picture of Electra here, packing up pieces of quite fragile glassware, ironically in large amounts of bubble wrap, to make sure that they all got packed up very stably and safely to get transported to Malaysia. And then I was fortunate, very fortunate as it turned out, to make an initial trip to Malaysia to kind of kick off the project in Malaysia itself. And I'd like to thank all the friends and colleagues at UMT who put on a fabulous symposium to welcome me, to welcome the project, and to get us all started. And we had several days of lectures, practical training sessions, and interactions to get this whole project started. And if you look at the date, the middle of February 2020, if this had been scheduled 2 or 3 weeks later, it would never have taken place, because the whole world was just starting to understand the spread of COVID-19, and international travel was just locking down at that point. So it's great that I managed to come to Malaysia and to meet some of the people and to see some of the plastic problems for the first time. And I had hoped to get back to Malaysia several times during the course of this project. But of course, things have turned out very, very different, which is why we are now all sitting in front of computers in various rooms in different countries around the world. And we've all obviously learnt to work in that way during this time. And it's fabulous in the sense that it can bring groups of people together who would never have the resources all the time to come together physically for these kind of meetings. But obviously it also makes it much more difficult to do many of the interpersonal things that often make projects such a big success. So one of the key developments of the project was the intention to create a Malaysian microplastics network and give it a presence online. And I expect that Yen will probably say a bit more about that. So I'd like to just finish now by acknowledging lots of people over many years who have worked with me on microplastics at UEA, collaborators at external institutions, including CFAS, Quadrum Research Institute on the Science Park, Compiègne, University of Technology in Compiègne, people who've helped me over many years to build the technical understanding, the expertise in microplastic measurement and assessment, and that hopefully has allowed this project to get underway. And so I'd like to finish there and hand over to the Malaysian collaborators in the project so that they can explain how they've developed this on and the work that they've been doing on the project. So thank you very much for listening, and I shall stop there.
Thank you, Andrew. We have got a few minutes if anyone wants to ask you any questions. Are you happy to take a few questions?
Yeah, absolutely. If anyone has questions, I'll do my best.
So who's going to be brave enough to go first? You can put your question in the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll turn your mic on and ask a question to Andrew. Silence.
Andrew, can I ask you a question? Maybe a simple one to start.
For sure.
Yes. With your microscope, are there particular types of plastic that you can detect better than others? Is there a limit on what kind of plastics we can detect?
In principle, there isn't. Most types of plastic we've tested do stain to some extent, but the staining is variable. Some things show up quite brightly, some things show up less brightly. There are some variations in colour depending on the type and state of the plastic, which sometimes make some things show up more strongly than others. There are certain types of materials or certain colours of materials that can be a bit problematic, and in particular black things don't always stain terribly well, and this is it's a kind of technical optical problem about the amount of fluorescent light you get back from them. It's not that the dye doesn't stick to them, it's just that you don't see much of the fluorescent light as a result of that dye being present. So that can make some types of black materials more difficult to see. Sometimes you just see kind of shadows on the edges of them rather than kind of brightness all across them. So there are some quirks and variations, and it's still something we're very much kind of learning about and understanding as we go.
Thank you.
Any other questions from anyone else? If not, perhaps Yen could get her slides ready. Okay, we've got a question in the chat. Andrew, did you have to change the protocol in any way in Malaysia? For example, using different chemicals because you couldn't source them in Malaysia. So maybe this is a question for the Malaysian partners as well.
I think that's probably more a question for the Malaysian partners. I know there have been some issues with delivery of various things, but I don't think the kind of the chemistry we've used per se is particularly a problem in that regard. Probably just getting sort of general consumable objects like appropriate filters and things could have been an issue, and indeed it's been a bit of a global issue due to shipping and manufacturing issues around the pandemic. But yeah, I think it's better for the Malaysian partners maybe to comment on that if they've had experiences.
Moritz, do you want to say?
Yeah, I was going to offer Yen first, but okay. Yeah, we have not changed the protocol. We had a bit of issues with the in the beginning, but we have settled up. As Andrew mentioned, we have trouble getting chemicals and chemicals ordered and delivered time. So it can take a few times to arrive and all that, but that's the main challenge, not the protocol itself so much. We have adopted it a bit for the WW, so but it's more of an optimization rather than a total change of protocol. Thank you for the question.
Yen, did you want to add anything to that?
Actually, it's the same like what Moritz say. We do have a problem. I actually get exactly what I used in UEA previously. It's just we need to adapt some of the method based on our sample. That's it.
Yeah, lovely, thank you.